In this session, we will explain the second type of class relationships. This relationship is the inheritance. Inheritance can be defined as a way to form new classes using classes that already have been defined. Inheritance between classes can be considered as a way of software reusability. So instead of creating classes all time from scratch, we just created classes by extending pre-built class, which will save time and effort in software development. Now, in order to make this concept, the concept of inheritance clear, let's assume there is a company that has two types of employees. The first type is salaried employees. Those employees are paid fixed salary. On the other hand, hourly employees are paid based on number of hours they are working. The salaried employee and hourly employee, both of those types share some common properties, which are ID and name. But salaried employee, for example, has its own property salary, which hourly employee does not have. On the other hand, hourly employee has properties hours represent number of hours he is working, and wage represent how much he gets paid per hours. So those two types are extending the concept of employee. This is way of inheritance. Now this is called the superclass, while those two classes called the subclass. Now also see that the employee class has a method called display, and also salaried employee and hourly employee, both of them also have a method called display, the same as that one in the superclass. This is what we call method overloading. Now from this example, we can infer the following about inheritance between classes. This relationship, the inheritance relationship, is also called is-a. So from that example, we can say that each hourly employee is an employee, and each salaried employee is also an employee. So the relationship is called is-a. The second thing is that set of objects of superclass is larger than set of objects of subclass or subclasses in general. From that example, we can say that number of employees are greater than number of hourly employees, or is greater than number of salaried employees, because those subclasses or those subcategories are already included in the object of the superclass. Now we will talk about implementation of inheritance. So we are using the same example, employee as a superclass, salaried employee and hourly employee as subclasses for the employee class. Now in class employee, this is just a normal class. We have two properties, ID of type integer, name of type string, and we have a constructor that receives those two arguments, ID and name. We have get and set methods, besides the method display that will just print out the ID and the name. Now to implement the inheritance relationship, let's see the salaried employee. In salaried employee, we have the keyword extends to represent the inheritance relationship between the class salaried employee as a subclass and the class employee as the superclass. So that means now the salaried employee is the subclass of the employee. So it inherits all public method or public members method and data. It has also, beside what already inherited, it has a private data member called salary. The constructor of salaried employee receives three arguments: I of type integer represent the ID, and n of type string represent the name of the employee, besides the s, which represent the salary for the salaried employee. Now in order to pass those two arguments, the ID and the name, to the superclass, we call the constructor of the superclass using the keyword super. We have also set and get methods. Now we need to add a method display. So public void display. Now this method should print all the information about the salaried employee, which include the name, the ID, the name, and the salary. Now we cannot println for example ID. We have an error. It says the employee ID is not visible because ID here is declared as a private. So we cannot access the private members of the superclass. We have two choices: either to call the display method of the superclass, so it will print the ID and the name, or to change those ID and name instead of private to declare them as protected. Protected members are the members that are accessible only by the subclasses. So if you want to call the display, so instead of that, for example, we want to call the display method of the sober class, we would say sober.display. Now this method, sober.display, in the sober class will print then the ID and the name. Besides the ID and name, now we can print also the salary. If the subclass has a method with the same name and parameters as the superclass, this is what we call it method overloading. So this is the class salaried employee. Now hourly employee, similar to salaried employee, class hourly employee also extends the class employee using the word extends. So now the hourly employee is the subclass and employee is the superclass. Class hourly employee has two data members, wage and hours. The constructor here receives 4 arguments, so it receives ID and the name. That those are the properties that are shared with the sober class, and it receives also wage and hours. So when the constructor receives ID and name, it just calls the sober class constructor using the keyword sober. Now also the same thing with the method display. Here we have method overloading because the method display in the subclass hourly employee is exactly as the method display in the sober class employee. So in order to be able to call the method of the sober class, we use the keyword sober.display. Now this method, the method of the sober class, will print the ID and the name. Then we need to print the hours and wage of the hourly employee.